What do product leaders love to do? They love to write strategy docs. They're so high-minded, big brains. We're such clever people, aren't we? And then the engineers say, why do we even need product managers? Couldn't we just do this? All they do is write docs. Those guys suck. What if we just did that? What if we said, this is unbelievably boring and all we're doing is making the product better? And the great thing was all of our customers came to us afterwards and they were like, thank you.
Using AI is effectively now a fundamental expectation of everyone at Shopify, not just engineers.
I'm just like, oh, this is an overclocked human. This is a person who overclocked their CPU to 50% higher than normal. I just know that this person is going to get way more done. There's a thing that always happens in software companies where at some point...
Hey, this is Carlos, CEO at Product School and your host on the Product Podcast. My guest is Glen Coates, Vice President of Product at Shopify, the global commerce company with over $1.1 trillion processed across all their merchants since inception. As a fun fact, if you take all of Shopify's US merchants and aggregate their online sales, Shopify is the second largest online retailer in the US after Amazon. Shopify went public 10 years ago and currently has a market cap of over $130 billion. Last year alone, they generated $8.88 billion in revenue and grew over 25% year over year while staying profitable. They are a fully remote company with over 8,100 employees on a mission to become AI first. During my conversation with Glen, he breaks down how Shopify's viral AI memo has sparked an expectation that every employee, PMs and engineers alike, use AI to prototype, code, and iterate faster. Revolutionary AI-powered dev docs and MCP server APIs that let anyone from seasoned engineers to non-technical merchants interact with Shopify in plain English. His org design principle around keeping the org as flat as possible, making each product leader own a domain of between 100 to 250 engineers, and now everything down to the details to ensure seamless integrated experiences. And the outcomes, assumptions, and principles framework he uses to ensure focus on clear success metrics, call out key technical assumptions, and guide our trade-off decisions. If you're into building AI-first products, you're in for a treat. Pacola, let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Persona, the adaptable identity platform that helps businesses fight fraud, meet compliance requirements, and build trust. For example, how can you know you're really listening to me, Carlos, and not my AI voice clone? These days, it's easier than ever for fraudsters to steal voices, faces, and identities. That's where Persona comes in, helping leading companies such as LinkedIn, OpenAI, Etsy, and Twilio to securely verify individuals and businesses worldwide, going far beyond traditional identity checks. Of course, every company has different needs depending on its industry, use cases, risk tolerance, and user demographics. That's why Persona provides flexible building blocks that allow you to build tailored verification flows that maximize conversion while minimizing risk automatically. Whether you work at a startup or large enterprise, listeners to the Product Podcast can get started for free by visiting withpersona.com/product school. That's withpersona.com/product school. Welcome to the Product Podcast, Glen.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you.
Glen, I did some research about you, and it seems like you not only like playing video games, you were actually a game designer before you worked at Shopify.
I was a game developer. I don't know if I think the game designers that I worked with would say Glen was very much not a game designer and you should never let him do that job. But I did work as a games developer, which was nearly 20 years ago now, but it was very fun. Allowed me to care about performance, allowed me to care about networking, allowed me to do fun demos at GDC where I ripped power cables out of machines to show that if servers went down, the game would keep going. So I miss the games dev was a very fun way to get into professional coding. It's very different than the web.
Or maybe these days, the designers will allow you to tinker with that, given AI, you can prototype a bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah. It's been, in the last few weeks, I've made the switch from normally when I review design here, I do the annoying thing where I record a video of me looking at the screen and I kind of point at things and I'm like, this should be like that. And then I wave my hands around and I do jazz dances and then they have to interpret what I mean. And I've now started doing the thing that I'm sure many people have, which is I take a screenshot of the thing and then I go into my choice. My one of choice is Claude Code. I say, hey, here's a screenshot, make a prototype that looks like this. And then I start trying to make the changes for myself, which is an interesting way to speed up the feedback cycle because sometimes I realize how dumb my ideas are because I try them out and then I realize why they're dumb. And then I save the team the time of having to mock it up, and then they have to show me, they're like, oh, Glenn, we're sorry, but your idea is really dumb, and here's why. And we just get to save that whole cycle. So yeah, that's nice. Thank you, Ella.
You're supposed to be the icebreaker section. But let's talk about, I mean, this is the month of the AI memos. And I think that Shopify, your company, was the first one creating at least the first viral AI memo when your CEO released that. And one of the things that he mentioned there is that using AI is effectively not now a fundamental expectation of everyone at Shopify, not just engineers. So I'm very curious to know what you've been doing differently as a result of that AI memo.
Yeah, I mean, the main one is the thing that I just said, which is I have now, because I'm an ex, like many product managers, many product managers are either ex-engineers or ex-designers or sometimes ex-MBAs, although we make the ex-MBAs sit in the back of the bus because we like to shame them. But the thing that I have been doing, like the thing that's been a little bit painful for me over the last 10, maybe 6 years, is that as the scope of product that I'm managing has gone up, the time that I have to code anything myself has gone down. And I've become increasingly rusty. And there's entire, like React is a good example for me of, I understand React quite well in theory. And I understand the architecture of React. I understand how it works. I understand what's possible, what's not possible, what's hard, what's easy. But I've actually never written a React application myself. Like, that's a dirty little secret, is that I don't actually know what the fuck I'm talking about. And so now I've gotten back into, I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm going to actually build things in React using Claude and everything. And I can actually sort of do this now because it's easy enough and it's fast enough. And it's all just about speed. I mean, so much of technology and software is just latency, right? It's like, I want to do this thing. How hard and how long is it going to take? Do I have time for this? So getting back closer to the code has been one thing. And then, I mean, like many people, I would say the other big thing that I've started doing differently is I just crunch data and I crunch inputs a lot. Like, for example, I had to do all my performance reviews this week for all my team. And one of the main things that I do in a performance review is take 360 feedback, and I try to extract themes and scores, and I try to figure out, okay, well, are the high scores coming from their peers, but low scores are coming from their team? That's a particular type of person. Okay, oh, is it the other way around? Okay, they're getting high scores from their team, but they're getting low scores from their peers. That's another very particular type of product manager or leader. And I used to have all these like spreadsheets and formulas and stuff that would crunch it. And I'd be like, oh, okay, I can see the pattern that's happening here. And now I just am like, okay, I've got my prompt, I feed in the data. And a lot of this comes down to data as well. So like the interesting thing about working, I think this is a bit of a larger company thing. That this probably wouldn't happen so much in startups, but at larger companies, it's often not that easy to get your hands on the data because it's protected by IT. It's behind some HR firewall. It's in some database somewhere that like you got to talk to 6 engineers before you can get access to it. And so the main thing I've been experiencing in trying to make AI work for me at work has been like, it's not enough to just know the prompts and know how to use an LLM. You also have to be able to get to the data that would go into, that you would pull into the prompt or like inject in as files or tool calls. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting thing for like AI enabled companies, is how LLM ready are all your data sources? Because I think a lot of does it work for you or not will end up riding on that single fact. Because otherwise it's just the LLM talking from its training set, and then like, who cares? Like fine, yeah, but that's not that helpful to me inside my company.
Totally. And in a way, I mean, Shopify has a bunch of APIs, right? And as you think about making them more LLM friendly and exposing your data to MCP servers with Claude or connecting it to other systems such as vZero or Cursor, like how are you thinking about enabling the system so people can properly harness information?
Yeah, I mean, there's been two interesting angles we've taken on this recently. Both were very early. Both work through MCP, but they're kind of different applications of MCP. So one version is the documentation version, which I think matters a lot, right? So we are now exposed. We have this AI assistant thing, which is, you know, what you would expect. In our dev docs, you can, instead of just doing normal search, you can search, instead of saying like search for the product APIs, you can ask an agent, you know, I need a product API call that looks like this and does this, and it'll look it up for you and it'll give you the signature and help you work it out. So we've had that for a little while in our dev docs, but we've now exposed that agent as an MCP server, so you can get to that agent from inside your editor and say, hey, I'm trying to do this Shopify API call. Please help me with it. And it just goes straight through into your editor. So it makes the workflow really beautiful. I'll come back to this in a sec because it's the thing that's crazy about your APIs being exposed through MCP is not just how much it changes the way developers work with your platform, but also how it might make non-developers work with your platform, even though we're talking about dev docs, which is super weird. I'll come back to this in a sec. The other thing that we're doing is we are actually exposing APIs through, so not just documentation, but APIs through MCP servers. And there's the main example of this that we're doing right now is exposing our storefront APIs, which are the things that are used to render actual storefronts. Our storefront and our customer account APIs, so that if you're building a shopping agent that wants to be able to search a storefront, look up prices, add things to the cart, do those kind of workflows that would be on the front end of commerce, that there's a really nice MCP server sitting there for your agent to use. I mean, any agent could totally reach out to our APIs and just use them raw, but putting that layer in front of them makes it just that little bit easier to work with. And so much of being a good platform is about just reducing friction. But I'll go back to the previous point because I just want to put a pin in this one because it's kind of a weird one. The dev docs thing was, of course, initially intended to help developers see how they could get basically access our API docs more easily, and we stuff it full of examples so that LLMs know the most common ways to use these APIs. But the crazy thing is that once you have an LLM hooked up to our dev docs through MCP, the thing is you can just talk to an LLM and tell it to do anything. And because Shopify has such a robust set of APIs, right? Like basically anything you can do in Shopify, there is an API for that. Like there's no backdoors. Like our web, like our web admin that everyone uses to manage their Shopify stores, that web admin is a React app that is talking to our admin API. And it's all of the things you can do in the web, there's an API that you can do the same thing with. And so now you end up in this very interesting world where you say, okay, well, I've just plugged my API key into, say, Claude, hooked it up to the MCP server, and you can now actually interact with your Shopify store just through chat, right? Because the agent is talking to the APIs that could do everything in your store and is suddenly very good at using those APIs. Right? So you can go into this chat and you can say, hey, I want you to go change all my products to be brown in color. And it will actually do it. Or you can be like, hey, I want you to go and fix all the SEO tags of all my products, go read them one by one and just go do it. Which ordinarily you would have to like go do in the web admin or in a spreadsheet or whatever. And suddenly you're in this very bizarre world of like, I know that this DevDocs MCP server thing was created to help developers write code, but it's actually a way to just put my hands on the platform as if I was like a master genius, like person who was literate in these APIs, but I'm just a person who knows how to speak English. And that's the craziest part.
So what came to mind with this is you have a huge ecosystem of partners, third-party agencies that help implement Shopify and do a bunch of other things. So how do you think about the cost structure and the type of relationship that you are going to establish now as more non-technical people are able to do a lot of that stuff and do it faster and cheaper?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think the short answer is I don't know, although I think like in any industry when the cost structure changes, and something becomes a commodity, the need to, pay a lot of money to access a commodity just doesn't really make sense from a supply-demand perspective. So I think you'll see, you see this in a lot of ecosystems at the moment where there might be a very small feature that the platform did not include out of the box that is then implemented by an ecosystem partner. And if it becomes just a prompt to an LLM to say, hey, can you write the 100 lines of code that would be required to just fill in this small gap in the platform, well, that makes it 100 times easier to solve that problem than it was previously, which is just going to change the supply-demand imbalance. And so if I had to guess what is going to happen here, I would guess that small, low-consequence problems may move out of the app ecosystem and into the merchant custom code, but it's actually written by LLM ecosystem. But I want to emphasize two axes there, because it's not just people come to me sometimes and they're like, hey, Glenn, how long is it going to be until you can just write a prompt into an LLM that says, please write Shopify for me? And then you let it do it. You come back a day later and it's written Shopify for you. And they're like, Glenn, why is anyone going to pay you for Shopify? Why will anyone subscribe to Shopify if they can just make an LLM write Shopify for them, right? And the first answer, which I think most people get to quickly, is, well, it turns out that Shopify is actually 10 million lines of code or 100 million lines of code or some absurdly large number. And as we all know that LLMs, the performance of an LLM degrades very quickly as the context window gets used up more and more and more, right? So problems that require very large amounts of code to solve will be not the first ones that are eaten by the LLMs, right? It's the ones that are very short that can fit into the context window will be the first ones that the LLMs attack. That's not the only thing. The other thing is this a problem where you have a high failure tolerance or not, right? So let me give you an example of a thing you probably have a very low failure tolerance for, is even if the code to calculate taxes correctly at checkout is only 1,000 lines, which by the way, it isn't, but let's just imagine for a second that tax calculation code was very small. I bet you people still do not want to write that code themselves because they want a guarantee behind that code, because charging the wrong tax amount at checkout is a very fucking bad problem, right? Very severe consequences happen if you charge incorrect taxes at checkout. And what you want as a business is you want someone else, whether it's Shopify or whether it's Avalara or whether it's, name some tax software company, you want the guarantee of that company standing behind that piece of code, whether it's 1 million lines or whether it's 1,000 lines of code. And so you really have to pay to So to answer your question, what happens to the ecosystem? I think the ecosystem is always driven by where's the value? And the value in an LLM, a post-LLM pilled world, really concentrates into problems that are very large and problems where people have a very low failure, failure tolerance. And Shopify, for better or worse, happens to be both of those things. It happens to be a very large piece of software for which people have an extremely low failure tolerance. We don't want bad things to happen during checkout. I don't want my website to go down. If my website goes down, I do want to be able to call support. And so I think that will happen to the app ecosystem as well, right? What are the very large or very low failure tolerance problems that people actually want help with?
I want to switch us topics for a second and talk about your org design, because Shopify has some unique aspects there. But first of all, you guys are fully remote.
That's true.
And also, you are the VP of product for Core, but I know that there's also more into that. So why don't you tell us more about how you structure your team and how big it is?
Yeah, why don't we so let's start at the top. So all of R&D is run by Toby. Underneath Toby, we have, at least for the product org really splits into two. So the core part, which is run by me, and core is kind of an alias for the core platform that developers build on top of. So that's all the APIs, all the developer tools, the app store, the theme store, the publishing stuff that they use to get their apps and themes to market. The core platform is in the world of core, and then the core experiences that are kind of included in the box as a user when you buy Shopify. So, the web admin, the checkout, the storefront, all that stuff, that's part of core. And then the other half of Shopify's product falls under CAS, and that is maybe what you would think of as like the optional paid extras of Shopify. So that's our mostly financial services and logistics services products like Shopify Capital, Shopify Payments, Shopify Shipping, things like that. And then also Shop, our consumer product, which is the purple app that people know and love. So that is in the other half of our product org. So it kind of splits into two. In my org, I tend to split things by, I have about 8 to 10 product leaders underneath me who each own a product area that is usually defined by kind of a main job to be done or a main part of the product. So there's a part of the product that's our storefronts. There's a part of the product that's checkout. We have a part around merchandising, how do merchants set up and configure their products for sale. We have a part that's around that's called Deliver, which is around like order management and inventory and logistics and things like that. So we kind of divide the org like that. And I've definitely been criticized. I mean, at various points in time, I've had anywhere between, 12 and 14 direct reports. And I've regularly, every so often, someone comes around and says to me, Glenn, you've got too many direct reports. Your org design's wrong. Fix it. And every time I kind of think about my org design like democracy, like it's the worst form of government except for all of the other ones. And it's like, so the foundational principle of my org design is like each one of my product leaders that reports to me, their scope is about as large as they can possibly handle with the following constraint, that they can actually know and understand everything in that product area down to the details, right? And I don't know why this is the magic number, but I found that, for someone who is a senior product leader, and that includes me, if you impose the constraint of you must understand everything in this area down to the details, you end up with engineering teams that are in the zip code of somewhere between 100 and 250 engineers, and you really start running into the physical limits of someone's brain, somewhere around there. So why do I insist on that number? Or why do I insist on that constraint? Well, one of the things about Shopify, and I think many great products, is one of the things that makes a large product bad is when the pieces don't work well together, right? And we've all seen this. Like we've all seen, the product that is like, especially like you see this a lot in enterprise software where you see a product that is like stitched together by acquisition, right? It's like, well, we originally were this company, but then we acquired all these related companies because it works well in our sales cycle. It's really nice to sell all these things together. And then we rebrand them all. We call them all like, Oracle blah or Microsoft blah or whatever name company, right? And then we go out and we sell it and we say, oh, this is our marketing suite or this is our logistics suite or whatever. And then you peek under the hood and you're like, none of this shit works well together. It was all built by different companies with completely different assumptions, and it's actually a mess, and it looks great in a brochure, but it's actually dog shit in reality, and it's really painful. And we've all had that experience. And so one of the things that I think Shopify doesn't do everything well, but one of the things that I do think we do well and we are trying to do better is, does this product work well together? When I say I've got Shopify email and Shopify forms, do those two things work well together in the way that you as a person who's like, I use Shopify for e-commerce, do they actually work well together? So the org design helps that, right? So if I group products together that you would expect to work well together, and I put them all under one leader, and I say, hey, buddy, you have to understand all these products down to their details, what tends to happen is those products work well together, right? And every time I've done the reverse thing where I start, if you ever find yourself having this conversation too often, it usually leads to a bad place where you go to the product leader for an area and you say, hey, I was just using that product and there's a weird thing that I just noticed that doesn't work the way you would expect. It's kind of inconsistent. Why is that? And if the answer too often is, I don't know, let's go down and talk to the PM who's responsible for that. If that's the answer too often, you're in a bad spot. And you're going to keep having more of these problems where this doesn't work with that in weird ways because you don't have one person who's taking the view of like, I see the whole pie and I'm going to make sure that this whole pie makes sense. I've found that it's better to have a large number of direct reports, but construct an org which is aligned to real products that a single person can actually keep in their head than it is to create. Like I could have a thing where I only have 3 direct reports, be super nice. I'd have to deal with like less people and less feelings. But the problem is like none of those 3 people would be able to fit the entire problem in their head. It's just like unreasonable. I couldn't do it either. It's just like not physically the thing for a human. But that's what I found works. Although, of course, we are now, of course, recording this in May of 2025. And I think everyone can predict that Toby's feedback to the thing that I just said would be, right, but what if you could understand a bigger problem with the help of AI? And that is, of course, the thing we all now have to go figure out.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I'm a big fan of that. Obviously, I come from startup work, so I'm always trying to max out people and give more stuff to people who are busy, because I found that the people who are busy always find ways to find time for what really matters. And the ones who seem to be not too busy, they will always find excuses. Yeah. So how do you ensure that your leaders really are understanding the details and can review large bodies of work and they are not just thinking strategy or delegating too much?
Yeah, it's funny. This isn't the answer to your question, but I don't know if you buy this because you're from the startup world and it sounds like you like people who are working very hard and very fast. One of the weird heuristics that I've noticed recently for like, is this person probably a good PM? Is just like when I watch them record a video of them, usually it's them demoing the product. If I watch them use the video and I'm like, literally, how fast is this person at using a computer? And you can see someone like that, like you see people and they're dancing around the screen super fast. They move fast, they type fast. It's like, I'm just like, oh, this is an overclocked human. This is a person who like overclocked their CPU to like 50% higher than normal. And I just know that this person is going to get way more done. I'm just like, oh, cool. You're overclocked. Amazing. How do I give you more tasks to compute? But back to your real question. I'm going to give you a very frustrating answer. And I wish, again, this may be one of those things where it's like, the correct answer here is to scale yourself with AI, which I have. I don't have the tooling yet to do, but maybe it'll come soon. Is the only way that I've figured out how to do what you just said is I basically do 3 things in my job. One is I set out a high-level strategy, which is like, hey, broad strokes for the next 6 to 12 months. Here are the main strategic themes we're working on, and here's where everyone should be investing. So it's kind of like laying out medium range strategy for product leaders to then back their domains into the strategy. That's part one of what I do. Second part of what I do is just like running a team, hiring, managing people, that kind of stuff. The third part of what I do, which actually ends up occupying most of my time, is reviewing everything maniacally. And the only way that I have figured out to make people pay attention to details is making them aware that if they don't pay attention, I am going to pay attention. And so I spend a very large amount of my time literally reviewing all the product we're building. Sometimes it's at prototype stage and we're talking about design. Sometimes it's at release stage and I'm reviewing something that's about to ship and I'm trying out the real product. Sometimes it's after release and we're reviewing the like what we call a done review here, which is, hey, we said this product was going to achieve this outcome. We're N weeks post-release. Did it actually achieve the outcome? Like, was this actually worth it? Did it do the thing we thought it was going to do? But in all of those cases, I don't know how to make people care about a thing other than to show that you yourself care about it and you yourself will review it. Yeah, I mean, even live, even I'm thinking about this as we're talking, I'm like, if I made the Glen bot that went through all the reviews and like, flagged all the things, would people care as much about the Glen bot? Or are we humans? Are we like, we're primal creatures, right? Like if you see that your boss, who you respect, hopefully, is looking at your work and is like, there's a detail here that you missed and I want you to hold a higher bar. Is there any actual substitute for watching the human face of your boss review the thing and ask you to hold a higher bar? Now, for sure there'll be some way to increase my range through AI, but there is also that human element.
All right. And I know you guys do two big events called Edition where you announce a bunch of new stuff. In fact, it's over 150 features. And that sounds absolutely insane to me. So for someone who's overseeing so much of that, like, how do you ensure that those things that you lay out as part of your strategy are truly working across the board for all the different product leaders that you are overseeing, and that, some of those initiatives in a way are helping other people's initiatives too?
Yeah. It's a good point. I mean, yes, it is a very hard challenge to know, like, great. Yeah, I mean, every product leader, and I'm sure many in your audience will have experienced this, is what do product leaders love to do? They love to write strategy docs. They're so high-minded, big brains. We're such clever people, aren't we? And you write a strategy doc, and then people go and make roadmaps from that. And then most of the time what happens is no one ever talks about that strategy doc again. And then you come back the next year and you write a new strategy doc. And you're like, isn't this amazing? Isn't this a bold vision for the future? And then people make roadmaps and then you never come back and check on it again, right? So it's a hard problem, and it's a bad habit of many product leaders to get into this cycle of like, I set the direction, but does anyone really know if it worked? And so for me, I mean, I guess I would not say that I am world class at this, actually. And the only two tools that I've found that really tell me if we're going in the right direction is, so often for a platform as large as Shopify, if I want to make very large structural change, shipping a large change and having it be adopted is in and of itself a huge challenge, right? So the world kind of ends up dividing into, okay, we've got this strategy. Here are some themes that are implied by that. For some themes, the best way to measure it will just be like, okay, we're going to build this huge new thing. Can we ship it? Can we ship it at our quality bar? And when we ship it, do customers use it? Do they adopt it, and do they use it? That's, lots of people would say, hey, Glenn, that's just the most basic, shitty version of product management you could have ever said, which is just like, oh, I shipped a thing, right? The challenge with platforms like Shopify is like the flow-on effects of shipping a thing can just take a very, very, very long time, right? Like you ship some new API at a very low level that implies you might ship an API that takes you a year to build it. Then you have to get the partner ecosystem to migrate to it. That could take another year. And then only 3 or 4 years later do you actually see that, oh, we shipped this API and it caused this huge structural change. But it's not very helpful in, my 6-month performance reviews with PMs to tell them if they're doing a good job, right? To wait all the way to the end and try and find like, oh yeah, we moved the number from, fulfillment accuracy moved from 25% to 65%, but it took 4 years, right? So unfortunately, for things like that, I do end up having to have this one big bucket of measurement, which is just like, you're going to build a big platform change. Can you ship it? Does it do the thing we said we were going to do? And are people even adopting it at all? The other bucket is actual results, which is, like a company that's, I guess, more like a consumer company or a more growth-oriented company is much more pegged to like metrics. And we also have those. It's just not everything, right? So like I have some things that I care about, like, performance metrics for storefronts, admin, checkout. I care about conversion rate metrics that go through our checkout and our storefronts. I care about long range adoption of certain things. I even care about, like, one thing I look at a lot is market share, right? Like, even like, so at our scale, I'll look at things like, okay, well, what's the percentage market share of Shopify of all e-commerce in the US? And the way that I figure out is our product doing well in the international markets is just like, well, what's the spread between our US adoption and, say, our French adoption? And are we closing that gap again, which may happen over a longer period of time? But there's so many factors that can go into that because the platform is so huge that attributing any one feature to, like, did French market penetration go up is often very difficult. And so you are, unless you A/B test everything to death, which is its own kettle of fish and its own huge problem, right? Like, do you really want to A/B test every little feature launch to death? You can. It's just going to take forever. So or is it better to move boldly and then sort of look in the rearview mirror a little bit and say, okay, well, is, in this example, French market penetration catching up, and do we generally seem to be going in the right direction? And that's a cultural difference. Like, I know that Shopify is a much less A/B testy company than many of the other kind of big tech companies, but that's also a side effect of being a very large platform.
And I was looking at some of that data. I mean, rough numbers, it seems like around 30% of the e-commerce in the US is powered by Shopify, and around 10% of the global e-commerce in the entire world is powered by Shopify.
It depends if you count Amazon or not. So Amazon takes about 50% of all e-commerce in the US is Amazon. And then of the remainder, Shopify is, yes, close to maybe a quarter or a third of the remainder. Yes, but in other countries, I think in Australia, we actually are a third of all e-commerce, because I think Amazon just turns out to be less dominant in Australia. So it depends on which country you're talking about. But I think in the US, like, if you just considered all of Shopify to be a single retailer, I think Amazon's the biggest. Shopify is the second biggest. I think Walmart is number 3.
So as you look at this type of metrics and you have super high level in terms of, like, market share, then you have specific product metrics such as conversion rate and checkout and average size of your cart, stuff like that. I can imagine there's another category of things that are really hard to measure. Or, like, I know, that are mostly based on intuition, or just in general, like, small bets that you're willing to play to stay competitive and continue growing. So how do you go about introducing things that are harder to measure, but you still want to try?
I think we have different failure tolerances for, like, Shopify is very merchant obsessed in our culture. Like, it's literally, it's the offices that we do have be merchant obsessed written on the walls. And so we are usually pretty careful to move fast and break things if break things means take money out of the pockets of our merchants. Like, we feel very strongly about making small business and entrepreneurs successful. So checkout conversion rate is one where, and this has happened actually. I mean, to Toby's credit, there have been things that we have done where, Toby might advocate for a particular change to checkout because he's like, I just want it to be this way. I think this is good taste. I like the way this looks. Or maybe this is kind of a forward-leaning thing. Like, I'm getting a little bit ahead of the curve here. I'm introducing a new feature that might, many people may not think about yet, but I want to be ahead of the curve here. And we have made many of those moves where we don't necessarily have a million A/B tests set up in advance to gate the release. But we have often done the thing where we say, okay, well, we shipped this thing. At some level, it was subjective, the choice to do this. But we can now see, because of A/B tests or some other measurement, this is actually hurting conversion by blah %. Therefore, we are taking N million dollars out of the pockets of our merchants. And then from there, we have to decide what to do. Now, sometimes the answer may be like, let's fix forward. We're doing the right thing. We just need to, like, fix it, and we can kind of pare back that conversion rate. And sometimes we might just say, look, we're going to unship it. Like, this isn't okay. We can't take the money out of pockets of our merchants. Now, that's really on the direct impact to bottom line side of the equation. There are other places where it is much more subjective, right? So like we as an example, we rolled out a big update to our admin, I think last year. It was the big Polaris update, and we changed the look and feel of the admin from an old design system to a new design system. Just looked different. Wasn't functionally that different. It just looked different. And that was just really a matter of taste. And we shipped it, and many people loved it. And a bunch of people were like, blah, we don't like this. Just the same as happened with iOS 6 to iOS 7. Remember when it went from super skeuomorphic to super flat? And everyone went to war, and everyone said all their feelings online? We do stuff like that too. But that is a case where, if we change the look of the admin, that's not going to hurt an entrepreneur's bottom line. That's further away from that part of the business, and so we're much more willing to operate on instinct and taste and subjective things in that world, but much less willing to do it in the world of the money funnel, I suppose.
I was reading something about your last year's release for edition, and you mentioned there was another 150 updates, and none of them were new. Like literally all of those updates were about making things that were working work better.
Yes.
And you call it a boring release or something like that?
Yes. The boring edition. Well, that was a direct outgrowth of, about a year ago now, I gave a speech to the company and I said, the really amazing thing we can do here at Shopify, which is almost never done by an enterprise, like enterprise software companies, whether they're SaaS or traditional or whatever, the one thing that enterprise software is not known for is quality. Like everyone loves to hate their big, clunky, old, business software company provider because they're like, these old dinosaurs, they're shit, like whatever. And I was like, wouldn't it be amazing to be the first business software company of all time that managed to achieve true scale in terms of like big feature set, lots of capabilities, solve many problems for our customers, but also still be that amazingly high quality, shiny, feels good. Oh, I love using this piece of software because it just feels good. Wouldn't it be amazing if we did both of those things? I don't know if anyone's ever done that, frankly. You're always big or good, but no one's ever both of those things at the same time. And so I was like, hey guys, what if we were just like big and good? And a bunch of my product leaders came to me afterwards and they said, hey Glenn, if you actually want us to be big and good, the next edition might have to be very boring because we've got a lot of polishing type work we need to do that's not like big new sexy features, it's polish. A lot of like make this thing work with that thing in the way that you would expect type work or performance work or things like that. And I said, oh, okay, well, let's lean into it. What if it was literally called the boring edition? What if we said this is unbelievably boring and all we're doing is making the product better? And the great thing is all of our customers came to us afterwards and they were like, thank you for making the thing work the way that I need to, because so much of Shopify is so much of what our customers want is they want to have less software, right? They don't want to build, like we're beyond the ZERP times. Like Carlos, you remember in the ZERP times, right? The ZERP times was, I'm going to buy 47,000 pieces of software and then I'm going to hire 47,000 engineers who are going to integrate it all together. And then I'm going to have this space armada of software and I'm going to go and I'm going to win, right? And then everyone did that and then money became not free. And then everyone was like, oh, shit, this is really expensive and really slow. And, oh, wait, I'm a shoe company. I'm not a software company. Maybe I shouldn't have 47,000 developers on staff. So a lot of what our customers want is they're like, can I please just have less software? And can I please have more Shopify? And I will do that as long as all the bits work well together. And so can you please, for the love of God, make that true? And so that's what we did. We were like, what if we just made it better? And I don't think I had a single customer come back to me and say, Glenn, can you please stop polishing the product because I really need you to build this big, new, sexy thing?
Wait, nobody's going to complain about that at the same time. And I have some PTSD from this. I remember back in the day when I was a previous company, a lot of engineers said, next quarter, we're going to focus on performance. And I said, yes. But then the problem was that they just focused on performance that was very hard to measure. So basically, they just took a quarter off, part-time vacation. Totally. So how do you ensure that that polishment turns into actual outcomes for the business?
Oh, this thing always comes around, doesn't it? The fucking 20% engineering time thing, or the like quarter of performance thing, or whatever. This is the thing that I always... Sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant now. Maybe because your audience is product managers, maybe they'll empathize. There's a thing that always happens in software companies where at some point, and by the way, I'm an ex-engineer.
Me too.
Here's what happens. At some point, the product manager makes the engineers do something they don't like, right? They put something on the roadmap when the engineers actually are like, we've got to work on some tech debt. I want to work on performance. I want to work on something that's not the thing that you want me to work on, right? And then the engineers say, why do we even need product managers? Couldn't we just do this? Why do we need those guys? All they do is write docs. Those guys suck. What if we just did that, right? And then they kick out all the product managers. The pitchforks come out, the torches come out, and the product managers are run off into the ocean and they're never seen again. And then the engineers start running product. But then the engineers realize that running product actually fucking sucks, because you have to like take all the meeting notes and you have to like get all the tickets in order and you have to write the roadmap. And then when products ship, someone has to have a go-to-market plan and someone has to have a testing plan and someone has to do all this stuff. And then they realize, they're like, oh, who can we get to do all this stuff? And then they're like, oh, you, engineer over there, you're really organized. You like doing project. You're a good engineer, but you also happen to be quite organized and good at communication and like project management. So why don't you do that? And then that engineer starts doing that job. And then they wake up the next day and that engineer has changed their title to product manager. And it just always happens that way. Anyway, sorry, that's my like weird rant. The real answer though is like, I've had this debate inside of Shopify many times where every so often someone comes to me and says, hey, we should just give the engineers 20% of time for engineering stuff, which means resiliency or performance or bug fixing or text debt or whatever, blah, 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 right? And then my answer is always like, why 20%? Why? Tell me why. And then we get into a conversation which starts to sound something like this. Well, because we've got this massive performance problem that is causing our users XYZ problems and we're losing customers or they're losing money or something, and we start describing a problem, right? And we start describing a solution that we could do to that problem. And then we start describing the trade-off between the value of the solution and the cost of solving it. And I'm like, cool, now we're doing product management. Cool. So why can't we just argue for, if this thing is so important, if this performance thing is so important, or if this resiliency thing is so important, why don't you just write it up and we'll consider that alongside all of the other things we could be building on its merits? What if we just considered this on its merits? Because then we might find out, like, actually, I mean, like I had with the boring edition, you might find out that we're going to put 80% of our time into engineering stuff. Or you might find your product is in amazing technical shape, and actually the problem is you don't have product market fit and you need more features, in which case your engineering stuff time might become 5%. And where that line is always a question of like priority, right? Prioritization is just deciding what is the best thing to do with our finite time and resources. And the thing is that no engineer would ever accept a product manager coming to them and saying like, hey, we're going to put this on the roadmap and it's going to take 20% of our engineers to do it. And I'm not going to tell you why. No engineering team would ever accept that. So like, why would an engineering team come to a PM and say, I'm going to put 20% of our time on engineering stuff and I'm not going to tell you why? And I just think it's a good practice for everyone to have to explain why. If you've got a great reason, great. Tell me what it is, and maybe we'll do a lot more than 20% or whatever it is. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
And I think you structured this, you call it the product framework, where you ask people to describe outcomes, assumptions, and principles before they start building the thing.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think this is just good hygiene. What are you trying to build? How will we know this was worth it? Which is what we do in the done reviews here at Shopify. So we just spent 6 months of 10 engineers building this thing. How are we going to know that it was worth it at the end? Sometimes the answer is really metrics based, like, moved checkout conversion rate by 1%. Or sometimes it's just going to be like, we shipped a thing and 100 customers actually used it. It could be any variation on these things. The assumptions and principles part, I've talked about this before, but I think one of the things that I've learned the hard way happens in product, and particularly product at scale. And even now, especially with AI, it's like there's even way more versions of this problem, is embedded in any product strategy are often very deep assumptions about long-term asymptotes of markets or technologies. And so, like a good example that's happening right now is, as a platform like Shopify decides to make big changes, often big changes to a platform mean breaking changes to APIs, which is very painful for anyone using those APIs and requires the big, ugly, dirty migration word, the big, scary, oh my God, we're going to have to do a migration. Oh my God, this might take years, Now, one of the assumptions there is that migrations take years. Why? Because you have to go get humans to write code, and it's super annoying, and they don't want to do it. They wish the product would just stay the way that it is. They got other problems to solve, right? But then you come in and you say, okay, well, I've got an assumption, and I've had this assumption, which is different from teams, is I've said, well, I've got an assumption that LLMs will be able to write the migration code. And if we differ in our assumptions about that, if you think humans must do the migrations and I think LLMs can do the migrations, we are going to propose wildly different product roadmaps, right? And we might not know why we're doing it. And this is the value of stating this assumption up front. Like if you're proposing a project and you're saying, hey, I'm going to make this massive breaking change to these APIs, but if you state the assumption, I think LLMs will be able to do the migration here, then at least people can reason about your strategy, and the people who disagree with that assumption can challenge it at the outset, right? If you can state the assumption, then you get straight into the debate that really matters, which is this project makes sense if LLMs can do the migration. It does not make sense if they can't. So let's debate that and let's be clear on that up front, because otherwise you end up in weird worlds where people are just, it's like people who watch Fox and people who watch CNN. It's like they exist in different worlds of assumptions, and those people don't often agree on much.
And what are some examples of principles for you?
Principles are really how you make non-obvious hard decisions, right? So like the most obvious one, one of the obvious ones that comes up in larger companies, particularly those with many different types of customer, how you prioritize between your constituents, right? So a thing that can often happen at Shopify, and you actually opened to the top of this hour by asking essentially a version of this, which is you sometimes at Shopify will run into a situation where you have to trade off between benefiting merchants and developers, like the merchants who sell through Shopify and the merchants who build apps and themes for Shopify. And Shopify has, generally speaking, a principle which is like we are merchant first, right? If we have to break between merchants and developers, we will usually break for merchants. And the example you gave at the top of the hour is that I bet you there's some app developer in our ecosystem who has built a very, very, very small app that does a very specific thing that you can actually one shot with an LLM. And if Shopify takes the step of making it possible for merchants to easily vibe code an app in Shopify at some point, we're probably going to hurt that app developer, because the merchants can just make that app in one prompt, assuming they're willing to take the failure risk. That might hurt that app developer, but it might really help a lot of merchants. And that's one of those trade-offs. And so having principles stated up front, because in a very large company, you're going to have a mix of people, and some of them are going to be like, well, I really care about developers, particularly the people in the developer platform team. And then you're going to have another bunch of people who are in the merchant growth team who really care about merchants. But if everyone agrees as a group, hey, the principle we have at Shopify is that we're merchant obsessed, and if we have to choose between merchants and anyone else, we're mostly going to choose merchants. It allows the company to move faster because we have a common principle that underlies the product strategy of like, how do we make these decisions? Because these are the kind of decisions that can get, I won't name names. Everyone can probably figure out which company I'm talking about, but this is the kind of decision that that dies in committee. Every county heard from, it's like, oh, how are we going to choose between the merchants and the developers? And then there's a 40-person meeting where half the people say one thing and half the people say the other. And then the company just doesn't ship anything. And then you end up being a very, very sad company.
Well, Glenn, it's been a pleasure. You are definitely not making me sad at all. It's been so fun and insightful and refreshing to hear a real product leader using that real startup mindset at a much larger scale. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, man. It's great to see you.